I always knew that respect was the pillar that held any relationship together. Love without respect is just a facade, an illusion that fades with time. I truly understood this the night Laura, my wife of barely 2 weeks, gave me that icy look, full of annoyance, and let go. If it bothers you so much, find someone else. There was no shouting, no drama, just that dry phrase that sounded like a gunshot in an empty room. That night we were in our apartment on A Street, a small place with thin walls and a mediocre view of the city center. Outside, the rain beat down on the glass, and inside the silence between us was almost unbearable. I tried once more to talk to her about how distant I had been. Laura had changed since the wedding. There were no more spontaneous caresses or those knowing smiles that once seemed natural. Only coldness and apathy. Laura, I'm not asking you for miracles, I said, keeping my voice low, almost pleading. I just want you to show some interest, to make it seem like we're still a team. She looked at me as if I was speaking in another language, sighed in annoyance, and rolled her eyes. Same thing again. Daniel, don't you really get tired of repeating that refrain? It felt like every word she said was a lash. I tried to stay calm. You weren't like this before, I said. And she replied with a cynical smile, before, how many times are you going to repeat that word? People change, Daniel. Things aren't like they used to be, because routine kills everything. I'm bored. Do you want me to tell you the truth? I'm sick of this monotony. Her words left me dry. I stared at her, searching for a crack in that indifferent shell. Bored of Laura for me? I asked in a whisper, almost afraid to hear the answer. She looked away toward the window as if my question didn't merit even a nod of acknowledgement. I don't know, she murmured, as if the mere thought of answering weighed heavily on her. All I know is that this doesn't fulfill me anymore. And then she blurted it out. If it bothers you so much, find someone else. As if she were offering me a way out, as if marriage were a poorly negotiated contract that could be broken with a single sentence. She didn't blink, she didn't hesitate, she said it confidently, sure that I would never dare to do it. I remained silent, studying her face. I wanted to find some sign of regret, some hint of doubt, but there was none, only coldness, not even anger, because anger at least indicates that something matters. There was nothing here, only pure indifference, and that indifference weighed more heavily than any insult. I let out a small, sarcastic laugh, the kind that comes when there's nothing else to do. I nodded slowly and said, "Good idea." I said it calmly, too calmly. She frowned, perhaps taken aback by my reaction, but she didn't press the issue. She shrugged and went back to watching the TV, as if that was all there was to our relationship. Two strangers sharing a couch. In that instant, I knew something inside me had finally snapped. I wouldn't be her servant, her lifeline, or her unconditional man. If she saw me as expendable, then I would start treating her exactly the same. And there, in that small, damp apartment, I made my decision without drama or warning. I would stop supporting a marriage in which I was the only one pushing. I turned off the lights. That night, without saying a word, I lay down beside her in bed, feeling her stiff back, and I thought that perhaps this was the beginning of something new, something that neither she nor I were ready to face. I didn't know it then. But that sentence of hers not only sealed the fate of our relationship, it also ignited a dangerous calm in me, the kind that only comes before a storm. The next morning, Laura acted as if nothing had happened. She got up, made coffee, and headed off to work at the downtown architecture office, barely giving me a half-hearted goodbye. I didn't respond. I just watched her leave and heard the door echo shut behind her. There was no anger in me, just a new, calculated coldness that felt almost comforting. It was as if I had turned off a switch and decided not to waste another ounce of energy on someone who no longer valued me. That day, I began to change the way I was in the relationship. I stopped texting her to see how her day was going. I stopped reminding her of appointments or payments that she always forgot. No more attention, no more favors. For years, I had been the guy who solved everything silently, the one who rescued her when something went wrong. That night, when the power went out because she forgot to pay the bill, I didn't lift a finger. She came home late, tired, and found me sitting in the dark reading by the light of my cell phone. "What happened to the light?" she asked irritably. "You didn't pay," I replied without looking up. "Fix that tomorrow." Her silence weighed more heavily than any shouting. 2 days later, she was late again. I used to always leave some dinner waiting for her, but that night I didn't even bother. She opened the empty refrigerator and looked at me. "Didn't you cook anything?" she asked in that tone she used to use without thinking. "Can you order something or cook yourself?" I said curtly, without taking my eyes off my phone. There was no argument, just that new discomfort that began to settle in the air like thick smoke in a closed room. At first, she thought it was a passing tantrum. She spoke to me as if nothing had happened. She tried to make casual comments. She even made an effort to tell me something funny that had happened in her office. I barely responded in monosyllables. I didn't yell, I didn't complain, I was just absent-minded, as if we shared space without sharing a life. My calmness began to bother her more than any fight. One night, around 11, she called me while I was at a bar a few blocks from home. Her voice sounded annoyed, almost anxious. "Daniel, the car won't start. It's raining hard. Can you come get me?" Before, I would have run away without hesitation. That night I just sighed and said, "You can't call someone else." There was silence on the other end of the line. "What?" she asked incredulously. I repeated the same phrase she had given me days before. "If it bothers you so much, find someone else." When she returned home, she was soaked and furious. She gave me a look that tried to burn, but she didn't say anything. Maybe because she understood that those words had been hers first and now she was savoring her own venom. I didn't say anything either, not an apology, not an explanation, I just kept reading as if she didn't exist. That indifference, I knew. Then, it hurt more than any fight. The days passed and the tension began to break her. I was no longer the one following her around looking for a hug or a kind word. She was the one watching me anxiously, looking for signs of attention. One night she came over while I was watching TV. "Do you want to have dinner together?" she asked in a soft voice. "No, thank you," I replied without looking at her. The next day. "Do you want to watch a movie?" "I'm busy." Her every attempt ran up against an invisible wall of her own making. The details she had previously taken for granted began to slip her mind. No one filled her car when she forgot. No one resolved her problems with her landlord. No one kept up with the deadlines she always let slip. For the first time in a long time, she had to deal alone with the consequences of her disinterest. I watched her confidence slowly crumble. One early morning, I heard her muffled crying in the bathroom. I didn't say anything. She came out with red eyes. She looked at me, expecting me to ask what was wrong. I didn't. I walked past her to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator, as if her sadness were nothing more than background noise. That night I understood that I was winning a silent battle that she had never anticipated. It was then that her gestures changed. There was no longer disdain or indifference, there was nervousness, anxiety, even regret. But I was no longer willing to offer comfort. I had spent too much time being her support, her foundation. Now I was letting her fall into her own emptiness, and watching her try to climb back up without finding my hand was strange. Part of me felt avenged. Another part was beginning to suspect that this was just the beginning. The night I discovered it, the sky was cloudy with storm. I had left work late and decided to walk a couple more blocks before returning home. I don't know if it was intuition or simple habit, but something in me pushed me to check her private profile on social media, something she rarely used. An old, almost hidden notification caught my attention, an untagged photo taken in a bar in the San Telmo neighborhood. I recognized her red dress, the one she had only worn once on our honeymoon. The date of publication froze me 2 weeks after we got married. It wasn't the image that broke me, but the detail that spat the truth in my face. The guy next to her, I knew him. Her ex, the same one she swore she had erased from her life years ago. There they were, his crooked smile, his hand on her waist, as if he had never stopped belonging to her. My breathing became slow, heavy. There was no need for further explanation. Everything was there, in cursed pixels that seemed to mock me. That night I didn't say anything to her. I got home, saw her in her pajamas, sitting in front of the television as if nothing in the world was wrong. "You took you long, is everything okay?" she asked me, pretending to be normal. "Yes," I answered dryly, without taking my eyes off her. Every word she said rang hollow. I didn't argue. I didn't confront her, I just watched her, recording every gesture, every movement, as if I were studying her before I brought her down. At midnight, while she slept, I searched for more old emails, deleted messages in the cloud, call logs. I didn't have to dig too deep. It was all there. Cryptic conversations with him, arrangements to meet at cheap hotels, messages in tones that barely disguised the obvious, and the dates were all recent. It hadn't just happened after we were married, it had happened repeatedly, while I still believed we were building something. The rage didn't come in the form of screams, but as a piercing cold that cut through me. In the dim light of the living room, with the light from the screen reflecting off my face, I poured myself a whiskey without ice and lit a cigarette. Smoke filled the air, thick, dense, almost as thick as the silence. That dark stillness felt familiar, as if I'd been preparing for this my whole life. The next morning I acted the same as always. We ate breakfast in silence. She with her cup of coffee and me with my newspaper, like two strangers sharing nothing but space. She looked at me sideways, trying to gauge my expression. She found nothing. "Is something wrong?" she asked cautiously. "Nothing," I replied. I smiled faintly, just enough to unsettle her. That smile was my first weapon. Over the next week, I continued my routine without any changes, but something in me had become more methodical, more lethal. I started leaving work late, replying to her messages late, disappearing on rainy nights without explanation. I wanted her to feel the same way I had felt. That constant twinge of suspicion, that uncertainty that gnawed at me from the inside out. One night, as we drank in silence in the kitchen, I threw a question into the air. "Did you ever think that one of us could ruin everything?" She stared at me, unmoving, her fingers tense on the glass. "What do you mean?" she asked. I shrugged. "Nothing, I'm just thinking out loud." That sentence unsettled her. I saw it in her eyes. It was the beginning of her downfall. In the following days, she became more restless, more attentive to me. She would try to get closer with small gestures, impromptu dinners, nervous smiles. But by then, I no longer saw my wife. I saw the woman who had stabbed me in the back while I was still taking off my wedding ring on our honeymoon. Every caress she made felt foreign to me, contaminated by that image of her with him in that cursed bar. That night, I knew the war had begun. It wouldn't be an emotional outburst. I wouldn't give her the pleasure of seeing me destroyed. No, mine would be a calculated, slow revenge, the kind that leaves no trace until it's too late. And as I watched her sleep, oblivious to the storm that was about to fall, I understood that indifference was no longer enough. Now I wanted her to know exactly what I had lost. The night I decided to confront her, the city was immersed in that artificial stillness that only comes after midnight. Outside, the rain was a thin curtain that distorted the neon lights of the neighborhood. Inside the apartment, the silence was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Laura was sitting on the couch in the living room with an untouched glass of wine. She was watching me as if she sensed something was about to explode but didn't know from which direction the bullet would come. I poured myself a whiskey slowly and lit a cigarette. Smoke filled the air as I walked to the window and looked out at the wet street. She broke the silence first. "Daniel, you've been different lately. I feel distant from you." Her voice trembled slightly, as if she feared the answer. I turned slowly, looked her in the eyes, and let out a distant, crooked smile. "I guess that's what happens when someone tells you to find someone else." I saw her swallow. She didn't answer. I walked over, set the glass down on the table, and leaned toward her. "Tell me something, Laura. Do you remember March 18th? Her face changed. It was barely a blink, but enough. That date was etched into my memory. 2 weeks after we were married, she opened her mouth to speak but couldn't find the words. What about that date?" she asked awkwardly. I laughed dryly, a mirthless laugh, Santelmo's bar, the red dress, and him. The word hung in the air like wildfire before igniting. Laura paled, looked down, the glass in her hands began to shake. "Daniel, it's not what you think," she murmured almost inaudibly. I leaned in closer, so close that I could feel her breathing quicken. "That's exactly what I think," I said, my voice low and razor-sharp. The silence that followed was unbearable even for her. She tried to speak, but her voice was cracking. It was a mistake. "I was arguing. You were working too much." Quote. Each word sounded worse than the last. I cut her off with a wave of my hand. "Don't try to justify it. I don't care why. What I want to know is how many times her eyes filled with tears." "Just that one time," she said. But her tone gave her away. I pulled my phone from my pocket and with a single tap brought up the messages, the hotel reservations, the calls. They fell one after the other like falling dominoes. "Just that one time?" I asked as she buried her face in her hands. The silence was the confirmation I needed. I didn't scream, I didn't throw anything, I just stepped back, exhaling smoke. "You know what's the worst part, Laura? That even after all this you still expected me to be here, to be the same jerk I was. I forgave you for everything, that I put out your fires." She lifted her head, crying. "Daniel, I love you." Her voice was barely a broken thread. "Love," I repeated sarcastically. "Love is not wallowing with your ex 2 weeks after putting on the white dress. Laura, love is not looking someone in the eye and lying to them, while the honeymoon room still smells of flowers." I walked toward the door, my shadow casting a long shadow on the wall. She stood up abruptly, trying to reach me. "Can we fix this, please?" she begged, grabbing my arm. I stared at her with that icy calm that was killing her inside. "No, Laura," I said, letting go of her hand. "You broke everything, and now I want you to feel the same way I felt. For someone to pull the floor out from under you and let you fall without a safety net. That night I slept on the couch." She spent hours locked in the bathroom, crying silently, thinking she could wear me down with her tears. But I was no longer the same. As the clock struck 3 a.m., I decided that her regrets didn't interest me. All that remained was the cold, methodical revenge that would teach her what it meant to lose me. The next morning dawned gray, as if the sky knew what was about to happen. Laura emerged from the bathroom with puffy eyes, wrapped in a robe that seemed to hang off her body. She looked at me with that mixture of fear and hope that only those who know they are about to lose everything have. I had already made my decision as the dawn dyed the blinds a deathly hue. There would be no reconciliation, no forgiveness. Our relationship was dead, all that was left was to bury it. I began to move the pieces together without her noticing. I called a discreet lawyer, one of those guys who seems to have come out of a damp alley, always with his file ready and a cigarette in the corner of his mouth. I want a divorce, I told her bluntly, without scandal, without drama. I want her to sign it before she understands what is happening. He smiled with that professional calm of men accustomed to the ruins of others. Give me 2 weeks, he replied. Meanwhile, at home I played the role of my life. I feigned routine, small empty gestures, the occasional rehearsed smile. She, confused, began to get excited. She prepared dinners. She tried to touch me with trembling hands, looking for excuses to get closer. I allowed it, not because I wanted to, but because I needed her to fall from the highest possible height. The more I believed I could recover, the more brutal the blow would be. I began to leave work later, leaving her alone in that silent apartment. I returned smelling of tobacco and whiskey, leaving questions in the air that I never answered. One night, while she was waiting for me with a set table and lit candles, I barely ate a bite. I'm tired, I said. Her face collapsed in seconds. That was the new dynamic, giving her crumbs of hope, only to take them away later. One afternoon, without warning, I sent her a message from the office. I won't sleep again today, she didn't explain. I let her head do the dirty work, let her imagine invisible lovers, let her feel the poison of her own actions piercing her skin. When I returned the next morning, I found her sitting on the couch with a haggard face. Where were you? She asked in a small voice. I shrugged. You said I should find someone else, didn't you? And I went up to the bedroom without looking at her. Desperation began to bite at her heels. She tried to be sweet, accommodating, even leaving me notes stuck to the mirror with phrases like, I love you and we can fix this. I would read them silently, tear them out without emotion, and throw them in the trash. It was cruel but necessary theater. I wanted her to feel the emptiness that she herself had finished. 2 weeks later, the papers arrived. I put them in my briefcase, cold, impatient. That night I invited her out to dinner. He chose an elegant restaurant, as if to disguise our ruin with soft lighting and crystal glasses. We ordered wine, made small talk, and for the first time in months I saw a flicker of relief in his eyes. He hoped for a truce. There was still a chance for redemption in his mind. I waited until dessert to give it to him. I pulled the envelope from my briefcase and slid it across the table between us. His smile froze in midair. What is this? He asked, his voice cracking. The freedom you asked for. I answered without blinking. His hands shook as he opened it, the divorce papers gleaming in the dim light. In that instant, his world fell apart. Daniel murmured, his eyes filling with water. I leaned toward her, my voice barely a whisper cutting through the murmur of the restaurant. Laura, when you told me to find someone else, I understood that you stopped seeing me as your man. Now I want you to understand what it's like to lose someone who always believed in you. Even when you didn't deserve it, I stood up, dropped the money on the table, and headed for the door without looking back. As I stepped out into the cold night, I lit a cigarette. Behind me, I could feel her world crumbling, but I didn't stop. The rain began to fall again, hitting the pavement with that hollow sound that accompanies inevitable endings. For the first time in a long time, I took a deep breath. There was no love, no resentment, only freedom. And in that dark, damp city, I vowed never to look back. The day we signed the divorce paper, the lawyer's office smelled of dampness and old paper. Laura sat across from me, her hands clasped together, her eyes puffy from crying. She could barely hold her pen. "Are you really going to do this?" her voice asked, broken like shattered glass. I didn't answer, just nodded silently and signed my name with firm, confident strokes. The sound of pen on paper was like the final click of a lock that had been rusting for years. I left that office under a gray sky, lit a cigarette, and walked aimlessly through the damp city streets. There was something liberating about the cold that hit my face. About the air thick with smoke and asphalt. For the first time in months, I didn't have to look back. There were no rings, no promises, no routines to uphold. It was just me, a free man, and a city that seemed to hold nothing and no one indifferent. I moved into a small apartment in the old quarter, the kind with cracked walls and views of narrow alleys lit by weak streetlights. The kind of place where no one asks questions and no one expects answers. I got a new job at a nightly newspaper, writing crime and crime stories. It wasn't glamorous, but there was something that kept me going. The long nights, the smoky bars, the murky stories of a city that never sleeps. While I was rebuilding myself, Laura was sinking. The rumors came naturally like inevitable echoes. A mutual friend told me she had quit her office job. Another told me she saw her every night at the same cheap place, drinking too much and looking for something or someone to fill the void I had left behind. I didn't feel sorry for her. Deep down, it was her turn to stare into the abyss and understand what it meant to be alone in the middle of that concrete jungle. One night, as I was walking home, I saw her. She was on the other side of the street, huddled under a carport, smoking a cigarette as if it were the only thing keeping her going. Her eyes found mine in the shadows. She walked toward me with hesitant steps. "Daniel," her voice said, full of pleading. "I made a mistake. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think about what I did. Give me a chance." I looked at her, the smoke from my cigarette hanging between us like a wall. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smudged. She was no longer the confident woman who had told me to find someone else. She was just a broken shadow of herself now. "Laura," I replied calmly. "There are mistakes that can't be undone. All that's left is to learn to live with them." Her eyes filled with tears. "You can't talk like that. You loved me." I leaned in just enough for her to feel the edge of my words. "Yes, and you taught me to stop." I turned and walked down the street, leaving her in the rain, shivering amidst neon lights and dark puddles. I didn't hear her follow me. I knew she wouldn't. That night I came home, hung up my soaked coat, and poured myself a whiskey. I turned on the old radio in the kitchen. It was playing slow, melancholy jazz, the kind that fills the air with memories that no longer hurt. I looked out the window and saw the city spread out before me, its twisting alleys and its lost souls floating amidst smoke and lights. It was ugly, it was hard, but it was also freedom. Over time I began to sleep better. I stopped looking for answers in empty places. I learned to live with the constant noise of the city, with the midnight bars and the silences at dawn. I let the past rust in a corner where it could no longer touch me. Laura kept calling from time to time, always with the same broken plea, but I didn't answer. Instead, I let the phone ring in silence. One early morning, as I walked down the empty street after closing the latest edition of the newspaper, I stopped under a flickering streetlight and took a deep breath. The city smelled of rain and smoke. I barely smiled. There were no redemptions or happy endings, just a new life that somehow tasted better in its rawness. In that moment, I understood that in this city, in this life, there are no second chances, only second versions of oneself. And I had chosen mine, yeah.